I remember they called me the head of the dirtbag left or something like that in the Newsweek.
It's a great nickname.
But they used the best picture of me. And I was like, they used a picture from like 15 years ago when I fucking looked great. And I was like, oh my, I was so happy.
Jimmy and I met, I'm going to say we met on that little military tour that TJ had us do. Is that when we first met, when we were kind of flying around and taking that van together? And I was doing a lot of sitting down on a stool, and you were like, what are you doing, Simmons? Like you immediately.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Is that where we met?
I'm pretty well sure that's certainly where we got to know each other. We might have met at a showcase or something in Los Angeles, maybe, or somewhere, but I think that was it. And yeah, I remember you fucking sitting down.
Jimmy's got a thing that I have where he'll compliment you in a way that also is critical. You know what I mean? Like I remember sending him a video of me doing. I was like, "Well, do you think this is good?" Or be in a submission. He goes, "You know what, Tom? That's funny, but you know what that looks like? That looks like a guy who wants to be a comedy writer. What is that? Like what? Like." Yes, and because Jimmy's, and then it's like you'll see as he does this, Jimmy's good at the faces. Like he tells a joke, and then it's like, ham it up with my face. Right?
A lot of my comedy, when I do stand up, I take off my glasses because a lot of the comedy comes from my eyebrows, and I'm not kidding.
Yeah,
there you go.
What do you do when you get older and those start falling out? Do you paint them in so that you still have an act?
Oh, these are already being painted in.
He's got extensions.
But Jimmy, I love his comedy, and I think we sort of hit it off initially just because at least I liked his writing and what he was doing and how he presented his jokes, and also talking about comedy. We were both big fans of Bill Hicks at the time, especially as a young comic. I just was like, Bill Hicks, and then you know that sort of doesn't help you like you think it's gonna move forward and stand up. Right? And then
that's not helpful.
Yeah, it's not. Like, that's what you do? Never mind. You know what I mean? And then we had a similar management agency. We had a similar agency that we worked with, this guy TJ Markwalder, who was great, and then we both sort of butted heads with the head of the place because he was always like, you're not as good as Andy Kindler, and right? And Jimmy had a great thing where this manager would be like, are you feeling like shit about yourself? Like right before an important showcase, he would say something like, you don't have any star quality, and you blah, 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 blah. Are you feeling as bad about yourself as possible? Perfect, that's right where I need you, right? And
that's it. Oh, I remember that. That's it. Perfect. That's right where I want you to be. No, I remember one time I was in, by the way, he was a nice guy and he got me a lot of opportunities and opened a lot of doors, and some of them I walked through and some of them I didn't. But so he actually did do his job, but he wasn't good at motivating.
Yes.
And I remember I was in Montreal and I was at the New Faces, and it's like, this is it, buddy. If you don't do it here, you ain't never going to do it because this is your one shot and blah, blah, blah. And so what you want to tell someone is the exact opposite of that. You want to go, hey, it doesn't really matter. People know you now. Just go out and have fun. And if it doesn't go well, then what? We're still going to get meetings. Most people don't even watch the show. You should say things. So it's like you're a field goal kicker. And what you don't want is your own team to call a timeout, right? So try to fucking freeze you out.
They call time. The coach ices you. Yeah. Come on over here. Don't miss it like you normally did in practice. All right. Yes.
So in Montreal, the first show goes. Everybody else is kind of having tough sets, and mine, it wasn't a 10, but everybody else was like a 6, and mine was like an 8. And so I remember. An NBC executive who was friendly to me said, "That was good. Your manager should go spin this now and talk it up." So I go up to him and I said, "Hey, so what do we do now?" And he says, "Well, now the next show you got to step it up a little more." And I was like, "No, what the?"
So at some point, your career, Jimmy, he's actually, it reminds me, like on that first gig we did together, you gave me crap about some material I was doing, which I was doing a thing about
hitting
your kids, right? Yes, he remembered. I
love that he remembers that.
He laid into me in the van for because we'd had conversations about nonviolence and blah blah blah. We'd been talking it, and then Jimmy was just like, "What are you doing? What is that joke? And do you really believe that, Tom? That hitting kids is good for him?" And I was like, "I do not." And he's like, "Then what are you doing? why are you saying that on stage then? I'm like, well, it gets a good laugh and it gets me to this other thing. And he's like, that's exactly not comedy, is basically what he told me, you know?
Wow.
Is that how you
was,
remember it, Jimmy?
I certainly remember how disgusted I was that he was doing that joke, and I don't remember what I said to him, but thank God I did. You know, I probably
agree.
would do it. I would probably do it a little softer now if I saw someone doing that, but I would still try to, insult them in a way that make them stop.
Insults that end up in growth are important.
Jimmy's always been a great comic. Like, Jimmy's the kind of comic that if he's sitting in the green room and another comic comes into the green room after doing well on stage, Jimmy's the kind of comic that other comics apologize for their act about. You know what I mean? They're like, I'm sorry, I did that because the crowd. And Jimmy just has to be the guy that's like, yeah.
So Jimmy,
right? Am I right, Jimmy? Like, especially like when we were coming up, the older comics would apologize to Jimmy for their acts. And then he wouldn't do a good job letting them off the hook. I'll tell you that.
It made me feel odd, but it did make me feel odd. I remember a guy I liked, right? And then he does his act, and he comes off stage, and he just looks at me, and he goes, "Hey, I'm not a writer like you." And I was like, "It's all right." Now I feel like we can't hang out, Like I actually liked hanging out with. He's like, "Hey, I'm not a writer like you."
Yeah.
And I was just like,
so Jimmy,
but, go ahead.
Doing. With the YouTube show now happening, how different are your shows that you've been running over the last few years? When you get out of are the crowds much different than they were previous to that?
I mean, would you ask me what the difference between crowds before and after COVID? Is that what?
No. With the
once you found your audience,
with the popularity of your YouTube show, is it much different now for you?
It is, the thing is, it's great. I love it, right? Because a lot of the comedy is trying to make sure people have enough information to get the punchline, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to make sure, which is why crowd work is so effective, because when you're doing crowd work, you're making a joke about something that's just happened in the room, yes, and everybody has the exact same amount of background information to get it. Everybody's got enough to get it, which is right. Crowd work works. Now, when you do a joke from my point of view or about anything that's unique to you, now you have to make sure everybody else understands this same experience. Like, hey, everybody in a drive-through and you have this, and so you have to make sure, have you? Okay. So that not everybody has, but that's what, when I go out and do my comedy now to my audience that paid to see me specifically, I get to the punchlines a lot quicker, right?
Okay.
And so that's fun. But I also make sure that I go up in when I'm in Los Angeles in front of crowds that didn't come to see me. Like I go up and, at the Comedy Magic Club, the Improv, the Flappers Comedy Club most often in Burbank. It's near my house. And so I went up on last Saturday, and people just haven't heard, because of the conglomeration of our media, which happened in 1996 because of Bill Clinton's Telecommunications Act, which proved he was not the lesser of two evils.
Right. But I have a question about that. Didn't Reagan start that with the deregulation of the media and letting more and more companies own more and more of the stations, eliminating the block between
he got rid of the fairness doctrine, but Clinton did the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which took us from 50 giant media companies down to 6, and then it took away all those restrictions, like you couldn't own radio station, a newspaper, and a TV station.
That was terrible.
So that's all gone. That's all gone. You can do all those things, which is why we only have like 2 radio companies in the whole fucking country. But anyway, so people don't get, just like Chomsky said, what's happening in their heads never reflected back. They always think. And so I got on stage and I said, if we're spending I just want to say, if we're sending $100 billion in bombs to another country, history has taught us anything. It's because we care about those people.
Yes.
And I said, I just wish they'd send $100 billion to America. And the place went fucking crazy. So I'm like, all right. So now I know it's not just my audience, right? So the things that my audience is actually a cross section of the fucking country. It's not just it's not narrow. It's like, I just saw the George Carlin documentary, and I was reminded how when I used to go see George Carlin, I was look at his audience, and it was teenagers and senior citizens. It was guys in business suits, and it was literal hippies. It was blacks. It was whites. It was everybody. I saw a fucking priest there. It was all kinds of people at his, and I always was like, wow, wouldn't that be something to have such broad appeal that people, and that is now my audience is very similar to that, and it's the thing I'm most proud of.
That is great, man. That is, and it's interesting because that's how I describe you to people now. Like, and I get calls from like conservative friends of mine over the last couple of years, like, do you know this Jimmy Dore guy? And I'm like, yeah, I know Jimmy Dore. And they're like, he's at least fair on your, like, it's always one side or the other, you know. But I feel like your journey was like, you were, to me, I see you as this super left guy for a long time, and then you built this thing on your own. I remember your thing started with you with your Mac and 2 TiVo machines where you'd record the news and then create your show yourself on your Mac and then go do it live, and started to figure out how to do that. And then you sort of got the NPR thing, and you had a comedy special going, and then it was like a local NPR radio show you did or something that sort of built into...
So I was on Pacifica Radio, which is public broadcasting, and here in Los Angeles, it's KPFK, which was founded as an anti-war radio station and it's also part of in WBAI in New York. Then there's a bunch of radio stations in between, and so that's how it started, because I started doing my video show called Pop and Politics.
Yes, that's what it was.
At the UCB Theater here in Los Angeles. So the UCB Theater, I knew those guys when they started in Chicago, and they asked me if I would do a show when they opened their theater here. And I was like, sure, you know, because you don't want to be a coward. And and then when I said sure, and I was like, oh shit, I got to come up with a show, you know, like I just can't do stand up. And so I came up with this video show because I couldn't believe the news. Like, I had hurt my back, and so I spent a lot of time on the couch watching television news. I'm a news junkie. I couldn't believe how what happened and what they said was happening was not even close to what was happening. And so I put together this show that made fun of that, and kind of like a more lighthearted. Anyway, and so that caught on, and this guy from the radio station saw me do it at the Improv, actually, and then he gave me a show at KPFK, and then the Young Turks called me after my hour special aired, and they gave me a guest host spot, and then they offered me a regular spot, and then in 2015, I was like, I got to start doing my own show, right? And because they had put my show behind a paywall, they wouldn't let, you know. And so I just started my own show, and I built a studio in my garage. Luckily, I was lucky enough to have a garage, and it just took off, and people were desperate because what happened was I was a Democrat. I was voting Democrat. I was voting for Bernie, and Bernie
I was telling them earlier, yes.
And so Bernie caught on, and then they cheated Bernie in the primary, which it was revealed they cheated him. And then they couldn't beat a game show host, right? At that time. And people, instead of Bernie Sanders making the Democrats pay a price for that and actually changing their rules and getting rid of super delegates and stuff like that, and he didn't do anything. He just folded into the Democratic Party, and he took all that progressive energy, that revolutionary energy, and he just funneled it back into a pro-Wall Street, anti-worker, pro-war party.
Is that when it's sort of spun for you with the Turks? I remember I had a long conversation with you I remember walking around in my driveway here in Greensboro on my phone, and you were so mad about the Bernie thing, and you were like, these fucking Democrats, they've screwed, and Bernie's just folding over, and you were like, I hope Trump wins. I'm voting for him. Because what the Democrats need to learn is that if they're gonna keep folding into the middle and not going with the progressives, they need it to get as awful as possible so that we get a real progressive. And you were so mad. I was like, that is a great philosophy of like, it needs to get so bad that the progressives take over. And then, and you were so mad and ranting about it. And that's what I was like, that's the Jimmy that makes me laugh personally, is when you're so fired up and like, blah, 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 blah. I just love that. And then is that sort of what happened, started turning stuff around at Young Turks too, where they were like, this guy's not a liberal anymore?
So for the record, I voted for Jill Stein.
Okay.
For the record, I voted for Jill Stein. I would not vote for Donald Trump. Thank you very much. But the theory was that they couldn't even beat. So they couldn't even beat a game show host. I mean, people were willing after 8 because what people don't realize is that Barack Obama was not a departure from George Bush. He was a continuation. Barack Obama took us from 2 wars to 7. Barack Obama kicked 5.1 million families out of their houses while he made sure the bankers got their bonuses. And his entire cabinet came from an email from Citigroup, which is why they want to kill Julian Assange, because he revealed that kind of stuff. He didn't give us. The joke I used to do in my act is, you had to vote for Barack Obama over Romney, because if we voted for Romney, we'd get Romney care. So I voted for Obama, and we got Romney care.
Yeah.
And so he deported twice as many Hispanics as Donald Trump did. He invented those kids in the cages. He dropped more bombs than George Bush.
Yeah.
So
in his defense, we didn't have those bombs yet. They were just starting to come out. You know what I mean? Yeah.
He repealed habeas corpus. He tortured Chelsea Manning. He was not a departure. He was
continuation.
He was a mascot for Wall Street. He was they would never let a white guy like John McCain kick 5.1 million people out of their house in the middle of a fucking Wall Street crash while he made sure the Wall Street got their bonuses. And they wouldn't, and then give us a right-wing healthcare plan, not even give us the public, all that shit. You know, they gerrymandered to get Dennis Kucinich's district taken away, not fucking the right-wingers. And so,
yes, I remember. That's who I voted for back in the Barack day. I voted for Kucinich. I remember watching him in a debate. It might have been at the Martin Luther King Center. It was supposed to be Barack's like time to really kick ass, and Kucinich crushed at that debate. Like, I remember watching a Barack look over at him like, huh, this guy's got my audience. You know, that's
well, so when Donald Trump became president, the mistake I made was I thought then they would be forced to do an autopsy on the Democratic Party like the Republicans did after they lost to a black guy with a Muslim name twice. Remember, they did their autopsy and it said we got to stop being racist and stuff, which turns out was wrong. Donald Trump came along and won, but he didn't win because of racism. So they were right in that respect. The reason why Donald Trump, people were 31 counties in Iowa that voted for Bernie Sanders and Barack Obama then voted for Donald Trump. That's not racism. They did that because they voted for Barack Obama twice and their lives got worse. That's what happened. Just like the black and brown people in barbershops in Milwaukee, when New York Times went to interview them, said, why didn't you vote for Hillary Clinton? And they said the exact same thing, because we voted for Barack Obama twice and our lives got worse. They see the game now. And so half of them didn't show up to vote, and the half that didn't vote for Hillary. And so that's not the I thought that was the autopsy they would do. They didn't. They decided to invent Russiagate, which was 100% invented. And which is why my comedian friends thought I was nuts riding in Los Angeles when I would tell them what was going to be the end of this. The end of this is the Mueller investigation is that there's going to find no collusion, nothing, because there isn't any, and blah, blah, blah. And there was going to be no proof that they got into this server because there isn't any, all this stuff. And then when it came out, they were like, how the fuck did you know that? I just paid attention, and I interviewed Bill Binney, the top code breaker guy at the NSA, who blew the whistle on all this shit. And he told me there's no way the Russians could have done that. And when he told me that, I knew it was true. And so anyway, it's not hard to find this stuff out. It is hard to find this stuff out if you just watch corporate media.
Right.
So I was done with the Democrats. Unfortunately, Bernie Sanders is not done with the Democrats, and he will keep funneling that progressive energy into a pro-war. And by the way, Bernie's a fucking war pig himself. He voted for all this Ukraine money. It's that this is nothing but people have no idea in America what's happening with the Ukraine or why we're there. They have no idea that the NATO and the United States has provoked this invasion. And because they bombed the Donbass for 8 years straight, they broke the Minsk Accords, and then now Merkel, the former head of the Prime Minister of Germany, admitted that the reason why they even did the Minsk peace accords was so they could have Ukraine enough time to build up their military, so when they did finally provoke Russia to invade them, they would have enough military to fight them off. This was done on purpose, and this was all because, of course, this is all about energy transfers, baby. That's why they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Who did that? The United States. Why would Russia blow up their own goddamn pipeline? And so right now, what's happening, Tom, and what people don't realize this, is that what people were told Donald Trump was going to do, which was blow up the entire world order and be a rogue state and fuck everything up for everybody, they're doing right now at the behest of the military-industrial complex and fossil fuel companies. Because as soon as this invasion happened, I'm like, oh, the reason why they want this is because Russia sells 40% of the energy to Europe, and the United States wants part of that liquefied natural gas market, and that's exactly what's happening. And so they kept bombing the Donbass, killing 14,000 people for 8 years straight. They wouldn't stop. That they're literal Nazis. The United States overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine and then installed this right-wing government. Zelensky actually ran on a peace platform of bringing the country back together, and then they outlawed the goddamn Russian language. He bans all the opposition newspapers. It's so what's happening in Ukraine is what happened in Iraq, which would happen in Libya, which would happen in Syria, which would happen in Afghanistan for fucking 20 years. It's a goddamn transfer of wealth from the United States Treasury to the international security state and the military industrial complex. And it's right now it's at the behest of all them and fossil fuel companies.
I love that. I love that. Like, but is that why you're not on any news show? Because that they're both on the other side of.
You're not allowed to say, as Noam Chomsky taught us, you can have a rigorous debate on television in between these two parameters, like how much money should we send to Ukraine, 100 billion or 10 billion, and you can fight it out, but you can't have somebody come on and say, hey, no, the reason why we're there is because of the military-industrial complex. This is a grab job. They can't have somebody say that. That just like they couldn't have somebody say that in Iraq or Libya or Syria. So my show was still, if you go to my Wikipedia page, says I'm a conspiracy theorist about the gas attacks in Syria, except what I did was debunk the conspiracy theory about the gas attacks in Syria. So if you say anything against the establishment's narrative, that makes you a conspiracy theorist, even though I'm correct and I'm debunking their conspiracy. Their conspiracy was that Assad, while winning the war, would then decide to gas his own people to kill a couple of dozen, doing the one thing he knew would provoke the United States to come into that war and attack them while he was winning it. It never made sense. It didn't make sense. And they had no evidence. And then the OPCW was corrupted, which Aaron Mate, award-winning journalist, revealed at the UN. Of course, you'll never see him on MSNBC, the New York Times, or CNN, because he's doing actual journalism that debunks the military-industrial complex's narrative, and that's who owns CNN and MSNBC. Those are the people that are the manufactured consent for war. That's why they could do Iraq. That's why they could do Libya. That's why they could do Syria and Afghanistan for 20 fucking years. And if you look at the Afghanistan papers, which the press never talks about, it shows that we didn't even know who our enemy was for 20 years. They couldn't even tell. Everybody knew they couldn't tell. Everybody knew that it was a clusterfuck over there, but everybody knew it had to keep going because of money, just like Vietnam. So they kill. I mean, if you go against the military-industrial complex, they will kill you. And that's what they did to JFK, who wasn't going to go into Vietnam. And then they said to LBJ, you better fucking go in. And weeks after his death, he fucking went in. And then they killed RFK because he was definitely going to get us out of that. And so it's all over. What Eisenhower predicted is come to fruition. We're sending $100 billion to the most corrupt country in Europe to fight a war that is a proxy war over energy transfers to Europe. That's all this is. And we're using the people of Ukraine as cannon fodder. We don't care about those people. We don't care if they get fucking blown to smithereens, which is exactly what's happening in Ukraine, which is why if you're anti-war and a peace person, you would be against this war, because this isn't about freedom. This isn't about anything except more fucking energy transfers, just like Israel, Libya, and Syria. That's all this is, and Afghanistan. So I can't
crazy that you know all this information. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what I love about you. Like, you know the information, so I don't have to. You're like Google.
There is no left. There is no left in America, right? And so what we do is we get in bed with Al Qaeda, who we say we're fighting. We literally funded Al Qaeda and Al Nusra in Syria. That's who we're fighting with against Assad. What are we doing that for? We still have right now troops in Syria occupying. The United States is occupying a third of Syria, while we say how bad Putin is for trying to protect the people in the Donbass from being shelled by Nazis. So what we're and you know why they really hate Trump, and this is the thing, because Trump didn't govern any different than any of them, for Christ's sake. He didn't build his wall. By the way, Biden is finishing his wall in Arizona, and he didn't fucking end the wars and bring that money back here. He didn't give people health care. He didn't give people a living wage. He didn't do infrastructure. What he did, he gave them a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. He governed just like Barack Obama and the rest of them. So why did they hate him so much? Because he accidentally tells the truth every once in a while. He told us there was a deep state that's controlling things, and to prove it, they did Russiagate on him for fucking 5 years. And then he said, they asked him, hey, why are you leaving those troops in Syria? And he goes, for the oil. They're like, you can't say that. He goes, no, it's the oil. It's our oil, and we're taking it. And that was, they go, get this fucking guy out of here. And so they can't have that guy. And that's why they had to get rid of him, because he wanted credit for the vaccines, but they won't give it to him because they can sell more vaccines with Demented Joe than a guy they spent fucking 5 years discrediting as a Russian agent. And so he still wants credit. They still call him an anti-vaxxer, and he wants credit because of warp speed. But so that's the ultimate irony. And so that's why they really hate Donald Trump, is because everybody knows that's what we're doing in Syria now. And we all pretend like Putin's somehow worse than us as we set the fucking world on fire in the Middle East. We just blew it up for the last 20 years. And everybody saw that video of General Westmoreland, General Wesley Clark on Democracy Now!, what they told him when he went into the Pentagon after 9/11. They had a list of the countries they were set to invade, and we've invaded every one of them: Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and Somalia. So, and the Sudan. So they have this shit planned out. And people don't realize that the only reason Barack Obama was allowed to become president, same thing with Joe Biden, is because he's willing to do the bidding of those people who actually pull the levers. Do you think that demented Joe Biden could have beat Bernie Sanders unless Barack Obama, the entire fucking corporate media, and everybody conspired to make that happen? No, he couldn't have, but that's how it happened. Anyway, I could go on.
So did this cost, when you started talking like this, I feel like you've always talked like this, to be honest, but have you started to lose the left? Like as far as other comics or audience members or whatever you're...
Well, what I have to tell those people is I hate to break it to you, but I need to disabuse you of the idea that you're on the left if you're a Democrat. The Democrats are a center-right party that is denying you health care, is funding endless war, and is also pushing authoritarianism and censorship. Those are all authoritarian right-wing bullshit. But I felt so you're not a lefty. Right. So the lefties have, I've stayed left, and the Democratic Party has moved completely right. And who said the Democratic Party was a center-right party? AOC said that when she was running in 2018, which is what I play on my show all the time. They've only gotten further right. So I'm actually on the left. So that's what the problem is. Have I lost a lot of friends in Hollywood and because of I'm speaking the truth about the Democratic Party? Yes, because they have a very shallow understanding of world politics. They think if you hate Trump, that's a worldview. It's not. Right. And they're just very sophomoric, and so they see the world in a binary view, like you're either with us or against us, very George Bush-like, and they can't handle actual nuance or the truth about what's going on. I'm sure they've never read Manufacturing Consent, because if they did, they would know that they're the ones who's actually being propagandized. It's funny, people they know propaganda exists, but they never think that they've been propagandized. And if you're for the Ukraine war, you've been propagandized. If you're for vaccine mandates, you've been propagandized. Do you
think instead of reading that thick Manufacturing Consent, if you just read propaganda, you'd get the same message? It's propaganda.
You can watch. There's a 5-minute fucking video on YouTube you could watch. Okay. It's about the 5 filters of propaganda. So I just saw it yesterday. You can watch that from Chomsky. You can go on YouTube and watch. There's lots of videos that explain Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent.
What turned you on to Chomsky?
I must have I must have saw him on PBS or C-SPAN or some shit. I don't know. I just feel like I can't remember a time when I didn't know about him.
Yeah. I used
So
to
I
say that
must
when
have.
people say there's a liberal media, and I'm like, really? Do you know who Noam Chomsky is? Like, isn't that proof right there that nobody knows who this guy is? If there was a liberal media, they would, in my opinion.
Yeah, so that's right. They're not going to bring him on to tell you the actual, just like they won't bring me on. Say and places like CNN and MSNBC stop bringing on guys like Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi when they were around RussiaGate. So they were the ones debunking it. Well, the ones who were really debunking it was Aaron Mate and myself, along with them, obviously. But Aaron Mate, I mean, he won the award for it, and it was so what all of a sudden guys like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald start because they're debunking Russiagate. They're now called right wingers.
Is that what happened to you? Like with COVID and with that, is that sort of where the left in Hollywood sort of, because I feel like a lot of people that were fans of you that I know as comics are like, he's all right wing and a Trump supporter, and I'm like, I don't really think you're listening because I don't think he is.
No, they're not. They're listening to a caricature of what the Democratic Party wants you to think about me. So I actually am a threat to the Democratic Party. That's why they write hit pieces on me.
That's awesome.
Newsweek. And that's right. And so my friends in Hollywood aren't smart enough to know that that's a hit piece. I guess they haven't had fucking hit pieces ever written about them. They've only had puff pieces written about them because they're on fucking shallow TV shows. And when I'm actually doing real reporting, news, and fucking debunking bullshit over here, they don't understand what that is. They don't know that I have actually made powerful enemies that are actually in the White House and tweeted out against me from inside the White House.
Really?
Yeah. How about Neera Tanden at the head of the Hillary Clinton's campaign, and she was at the Center for American Progress. She's the president. She wanted me deplatformed. All those fucking things happened. So AOC said I was committing violence on her. She's a sitting congressperson. She's fucking tweeting out Jimmy Dore's committing violence against me.
When you were a young comedian, Jimmy, if I'd have told you that there'd be some hit pieces written about you by people in the government, what would you have thought about that? Would that have felt like success to you in any way?
Yes, actually, yes.
Well, then, I say to you, sir, congratulations.
That's awesome, man.
So Ben Mankiewicz,
That's awesome.
Mankiewicz, the host of Turner Classic Movies, my old friend Ben Mankiewicz, his father was on the Nixon enemies list, and he got a hold of it somehow. A copy of the Nixon's enemy list, and his father, of course, framed it and put it on his wall in his office. Of course, you would, right? So that's like what it feels like. Yeah, exactly. And so, it's just like whenever you stick your neck out to do things, people are going to hate you, and you're going to get. That's why a lot of people don't do it, because that's how they're narrative enforcers, and they get people in Hollywood who don't know anything. Look at Sean Penn, for fuck's sake. The guy's the biggest tool of the CIA in the world, and he thinks he's walking around like he's James Dean. No, you're a fucking tool of war. You're the tool of the military-industrial complex, of fossil fuel companies. You're an actual tool.
I love that you've had this core to you since we met, you know what I mean, of the military-industrial complex, and like it's not one side or the other. These are two parties that are in the same thing. They're both supporting growth and consumption on a place that can't ultimately sustain that, and it's our economic policy all over the world. We say we fight for freedom, and when was the last war we actually fought for freedom? Like you've sort of had this mentality since I've known you, and to be honest, like as I mean, I know you from comedy, and to be honest, I don't watch a lot of the political, the stuff from Young Turks and all that, so I knew what you were doing, but I didn't know what you were doing, And so recently when I started to see you, like when I called you a couple weeks ago or a month or so ago, I was like, man, you're doing it. You're doing what we talked about with Hicks, like you're not a guy that's on one side or the other. You have a truth that you're going after, and fuck every side that disagrees with that or whatever, you know what I mean? And I admire it. I think normally that path leads to nowhere, and it's not for you. It's leading to fans finding you and going to your show, and it's cool, it is, because you've always had that way of writing jokes that like makes a great point crisply, and it's what comedy is to me. Like I've told you before, your joke about religion, it's such a succinct we all have, I don't even know the setup, but the punchline is, I don't let my parents pick my pants. And that's like, every time you go to write a joke about religion, that is like, it's like the Carlin thing with
the earth
with
and
the environment.
styrofoam,
We're all
yeah.
here for plastic or whatever. Like, to me, you have one of those iconic bits, you know? And
thanks for reminding me of that. I forgot that. Yeah, I used to say, most people are the same religion of their parents. They let their parents pick their religion. I wouldn't let my parents pick a pair of fucking pants for me.
And then your new special, which I watched the first version of, right? And then since you told me you re-recorded it, if you want to tell that story.
It. Yeah, so we went down to the Lyceum Theater, which is like a 500-seat theater in San Diego. And I did this, I was ready to do my special because I was afraid COVID was going to be over. And I have all these jokes that I just got, working about COVID.
Yes.
I'd spent, 8 months on the road developing these jokes. And I was afraid that it's going to go away and these jokes will seem passe. So I wanted to get them recorded. Like my last same.
That's such a comic mentality. You're like, I'm afraid they'll cure COVID and my jokes won't be funny anymore.
Yeah. So we went to, in July, we went to the Lyceum Theater. We recorded it, and once they color corrected it, it looks fantastic, and it sounds great. But I appreciate it. I think I was still finding it. I was still in my head, and I didn't swing. For lack of a better term, it just didn't swing. But all the elements were there, and it definitely, you would get a sense of who I am. But it just didn't swing. And so when I went to Austin, I was getting ready to drop it. It had become, we were done with post-production on that special. And when I was going to do a weekend in Austin, Steph said, hey, let me just rent a couple of cameras and let's film it and see what happens. And so we did. So it was a much lower budget thing.
Nice.
And it swings. And
That's
so
because you've had time to work the jokes and get them out of your head and onto the stage.
Yeah, and you find all those little moments that make the jokes move, right? Instead of it being set up, punchline, then it's like set, laugh, set, titter, 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 bang, bang. So you find all those titters on the way, all those asides, all those things.
All the eyebrows.
Well, you also had the benefit of watching all that game tape of the previous special, and
correct. So anyway, so I redid it, and it should be. Of course, I didn't. I'm so stupid. I didn't bring my audio guy with me. I don't know why I didn't do that.
That's
and so,
how
of course,
goes.
I didn't record it correctly. So we're having a hell of a time correcting it. But I think we got it. It sounds good.
Are you still in love with comedy, Jimmy?
Oh my God, yes. If it's yes, I woke up the other day and it's a funny story, but I woke up the other day, yesterday, feeling fucking horrible, right? Like anxious and like depressed, like I did something wrong, and I got to make a change, and I started doing my finances in my head, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to quit this, and I'm just going to go do stand-up, and I don't care how much, and then when I got to the bathroom, I realized why I felt like that, and it was because of a dream that I had had.
Really?
Yeah, in which I encountered my shadow, and it was an ugly part of myself that I didn't want to see. And so I had to live with it in my dream. Anyway, so I'm doing this Jungian shadow work, unconscious, where it's very trippy to people if you don't know anything about Carl Jung. But so anyway,
I love him.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
He's one of my go-tos for why proof that we have a mass consciousness.
We have a collective unconscious, yes, and that we come from one consciousness. We have a personal unconscious, and then we have a collective unconscious. And in my unconscious, in that dream, I met a archetype in our collective. Anyway, so I'm going through lots of things like that. I meet my anima in my dreams often, and I'm starting to see where the dream world and what we call our conscious world aren't really. They're connected, put it that way. So the same thing that's controlling my unconscious and creating things is also creating things in my conscious life. As Carl Jung said, the unconscious sets up the future well in advance, which is why it can be guessed at by mystics, by clairvoyance.
So
Yes.
when you, as you're dealing with anxiety and depression, and you're also having hit pieces written on you, you're having the success of your YouTube show, finding your audience, and still in love with comedy. When you think about your anxiety and your depression, and then how do you navigate all of the attention you're getting, positive and negative, while still trying to be a human being? It sounds like those things would be pretty complex when you have such complex opinions about the world and you're putting them out there consistently. What's that like when that shit starts coming in? I've never had a hit piece written on me by someone in the White House.
At the White House didn't write that hit piece.
Well, you
That
know what
was
I mean.
yeah, but directed by the Democratic Party machine. Put
Sure.
it that way.
So how do you navigate all of that shit when it starts coming back into you, and you're trying to be a human being? What's that like?
At first it was very difficult. I didn't. There's no training for how to handle that.
Right.
What really bothered me, I was quick to realize that it was actually so I remember they called me the head of the dirtbag left or something like that in the Newsweek.
It's a great nickname.
But they used the best picture of me. And I was like, they used a picture from like 15 years ago where I fucking looked great. And I was like, oh my, I was so happy.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And, so then I quickly realized that actually gives me street cred when people see that and see me maligned and attacked unfairly, because you read those articles and there's nothing there. So the people who are my fans, it helps me, right? It boosts me.
Right.
It doesn't hurt me. But the point of those pieces aren't for my fans. They're for so nobody else becomes my fan.
It's to slow your momentum.
And slow my momentum and muddy the waters, and so people can link to that article and send it to their friend. He's a piece of shit, and so I can't. And it's just like they've done with the algorithm on YouTube to try to limit my growth. But we still have broken through, and we've passed over 1 million subscribers.
1.1 is fantastic.
Which nobody thought we'd get to, and so it doesn't feel good. What feels bad is people I've known for 30 years. All just now publicly, they hate me and publicly shit on me. And,
like, what do you mean, and for what?
Like Tom's going to do when this interview is over.
No.
Well, like a guy you mentioned earlier, a comedian. I don't want to.
Sure.
It's like fine. I don't want to elevate these people, right? So then someone takes a clip of this, and then they can play it.
As a matter of fact, we're going to have more viewers from your show probably watching this than are from my show. Could you explain to your audience who the fuck I am? All right,
Tom, people tweeted out. I mean, I've been trending for the last 2-3 days in a row now, because people have been clipping videos of me on other people's podcasts and pretending I said the opposite of what I said. Mm-hmm. It's constant, right? So the people, I now have people probably paid by David Brock, the Democratic Party, as a full-time job to watch my show and try to discredit me. That's not.
Well, here's the thing about you, man. And I mean, I'm an asshole when it comes to watching comedy. I'm you from when we met, saying, "What are you doing with that joke?" You know what I mean? Like, and watching your comedy, you're doing it in a way that most people aren't doing it, which is you're open to you being wrong. Like, that was what I watched the first version of your San Diego special because you sent it to me, the link to watch, and you start off doing your COVID jokes and blah, 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 and you're talking about how scared you are of the thing and how paranoid you are and how other people aren't getting shots or aren't masking up around you and you're yelling at them and blah, blah, blah. And then through the show and through your own learning and investigation and looking at the evidence, your mind changes about the thing. And it shows, and I think it gives you credibility for all the other issues. Like, I've looked into this. And my mind does change, where most of us, most people in general, have their opinion and then find the ways to support that, and then throw people like you under the bus for thinking differently and saying this guy's a fucking right-wing crazy person or whatever, you know? And your special, to me, that's what one of the things I loved about it was you sort of set it up in a way that gives you credibility about every issue because you show that you're a free thinker and you're willing to question your own thoughts. And most comics aren't.
I really appreciate the kind words. I appreciate that you taking time to watch my special, and I appreciate the honest review. Of course, I think it's honest. But now I forget. I had a million things I wanted to say. I should have wrote them down, written them down. Now I can't remember because your question was so fucking long-winded. But
it was just me talking. Oh my God, do you not remember you talking about the Ukraine earlier? Oh my, Trunty fell asleep 3 times. I had to wake him up with a bomb sound.
So what happened to me was when I got the joke I do in my act is like I was convinced if I got COVID, I was going to die. I was going to go right to my bones and kill me because I have a bone condition. And so, when they came out with the vax, I was first in line. I got in line in 2018.
Right.
They were like, they opened the door. They're like, wow. You go, yeah, I'm here. I'm already here.
That was just a way for you to brag about how you do research, like stuff before it happens.
So that's enough. So when I got vaccine injured, and of course they don't want to release the vaccine trial data, right, for 75 years. You know that, right? So maybe your audience doesn't. The FDA wasn't going to release the vaccine trial data for 75 years, and I was like, did Pfizer kill Kennedy?
Right.
And so I get the vax. So I get the vax, and I get vaccine injured, and as soon as I look into it, I find out everything. At every turn, they're lying because I got put into a clinical trial, right? Because I tweeted out that I was sick 5 weeks after my second jab. I was still sick as a dog. I was exhausted. I had the wicked stiff neck headaches. I couldn't catch my breath. I had joint pain. It was horrible. It was horrible. And so I tweeted out, anybody else having these symptoms? And then a doctor who follows me was actually one of the leading guys in how to treat this shit and how to treat long COVID. And he was running, him and his name was Dr. Yoganda and Dr. Bruce Patterson. And they were leading this big trial. And so he put me in it, and he gave me all these drugs. Fluvoxamine, azithromycin, that zinc, vitamin D3, and ivermectin was one of them. And I said, hey, whoa, what's with this ivermectin? That's horse paste. And then he sat down and explained to me, no, Jimmy, that's actually one of the safest drugs that's ever been developed. It won the Nobel Prize for Human Medicine in 2015, and it's on the WHO list of essential medicine, and it's been prescribed to billions of people. And I was like, really? I go, well, why would they say that? And they said, because if it treats COVID, they can't get their emergency use authorization, and then they can't make $100 billion off a vaccine.
So they just weren't in a rush to cure? They were just in a rush to make money, is what you're saying?
Imagine my chagrin. So, I mean, the people who put asbestos in baby powder and then sold it to poor people, yeah, they actually fucking did. People who put aid-tainted fucking blood in blood clotting medicine and sent it to poor countries, yeah, they did. Those people who sold us Vioxx knowing that it was going to kill more people than it helped, but it was going to make them $6 billion. Those same fucking people who got half the country hooked on fucking heroin and Oxycontin, those people actually lied to us about a fucking vaccine that isn't even a vaccine, which is why they had to change the definition of what a fucking vaccine is. You know, ivermectin was considered a wonder drug before COVID. They were looking at it because it could cure certain types of cancer. This thing, and it's less toxic than aspirin. And you listen to Dr. Fauci and Collins and all the rest of the corporate-owned media, they'll lie to you and tell you that it's horse paste, you shouldn't take it, and it's dangerous. It's safer than fucking aspirin. It actually does treat. There's hundreds of studies that show its efficacy in treating COVID, and it treats it early, and they killed people, and they don't give a fuck. Yes, they fucking killed people, and now you're finding out that there's excess deaths. What is that, Jimmy? Well, in the places that have all been mostly vaccinated, there's more people dying now than were dying at the height of COVID, and they're not dying from COVID. They're dying from something else, and they don't know what it is, but the countries that aren't vaccinated don't have any excess death. So the the initial conclusion that demands more study is that is the vaccine connected to all these excess deaths? And if they see how they were screaming for bloody murder during COVID about the deaths from COVID, there's more people dying now than were dying during COVID from COVID, and nobody's talking about it. Why? Because Big Pharma doesn't want you to talk about it. And I don't know if you know, they never even tested to see if the vaccine stopped transmission. So my show, I had all this information in May, June of 2021. 2021. So that's almost 2 years ago. I had all this information and none of my friends had it. Even people who worked on my show were immune to this accurate information.
I'm just learning about it now.
They wouldn't look into it. They didn't know any. So I knew all this, and I could tell. I tried to do these. So when they were trying to mandate the vaccine, I spoke up against it because I knew the dangers of it. I knew they were lying about early treatments. They were suppressing things like monoclonals. So I knew all this. I knew we also couldn't vaccinate our way out of the pandemic because I had Dr. Robert Malone come on my show. Who was that? He's the guy who actually invented the mRNA vaccine technology at the fucking Salk Institute. And then they try to discredit him and say he's some kind of a quack. Why? Because he was giving a counter narrative to Big Pharma funded vaccine about COVID-19. And he came on my show and he told me that he explained how mRNA vaccines work. And then he told me that you cannot use this vaccine to get out of this pandemic. It's never going to happen. He said, even if everybody gets vaccinated, this virus is not going away. And this is what they call a leaky vaccine. And what a leaky vaccine means is that even if you get vaccinated, you can still get the virus and get sick, and you can still transmit it. And so when I knew that vaccine mandates were nothing but a money grab from Big Pharma, and they had no science behind them, and they didn't. And they also brought on a Marxist professor, Professor Richard Wolf, onto my show, who was against vaccine mandates from a worker perspective, from a Marxist perspective. So now I had the workers, and by the way, the Black Caucus of the Green Party also against vaccine mandates. So I had a Marxist professor, the leading Marxist professor in the country, and then I had on the leading mRNA vaccine by a scientist, and they were telling me this. They were both against vaccine mandates, and so then I went out and proved that the countries that had the highest vaccination rates were also having the highest outbreaks of the virus. People didn't want me to say that. And when I put it up on Facebook, it got bogusly fact checked and it said it was disinformation, which it wasn't. That's Bill Gates funded bullshit fact checkers. They're not actual fact checkers. They're funded by oligarchs that have a narrative that they're pushing. So they're all bogus fact checks. Every one of my things that I've said has been proven to be true. They lied about masks. They lied about natural immunity. They lied about herd immunity. They lied about funding of the virus that caused for research that caused this virus. Fauci lied to Congress, which is a felony. He said they didn't fund gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute. The NIH then later came out and said, yes, we did. We have to admit it. And so he's not prosecuted, even though he lied about that. So they lied about everything. They lied about lockdowns. You know, they've never handled, we've had pandemics in the past. They never handled it this way. And one more thing about the vaccine. In 1976, we had the swine flu, or was it 77? 1 in 100,000 people had an adverse reaction, meaning they had a side effect that was serious. They pulled that vaccine. In 1999, the rotavirus, 1 in 10,000 people had a reaction to that was serious. They pulled that vaccine. 1 in 800 people getting this mRNA vaccine has had a serious event. They're recommending it. That's how corrupt shit is now. You know, the FDA gets 70% of their funding directly from Big Pharma. Why do you think Big Pharma wants to fund the FDA? Because so they can fucking control it. It's called regulatory capture, and we're living in it. And I'm going to tell your listeners this right now, Tom. We've been lied to on such an enormous level that our minds, I don't think, will ever be able to comprehend what has happened.
So do you feel like your comedy and the way and your show is going to put a dent in that and wake people up and change that, or are you screaming at a wall and getting noticed?
No, I think the tide has turned. I think if you go on Twitter, the tide has turned. Top cardiologists that were suppressed are now having access to social media, like Dr. Ahim Mehorta from the UK. Top cardiologist has says that his father, who was also a cardiologist, got the vaccine, died of heart disease. He never had heart disease. He died from a heart attack, and he connects that directly to the vaccine. He's got research and data and numbers. He's one of the leading cardiologists in the UK. He just got out on the BBC and said this. So also Dr. McCullough, the guys that people talk about Joe Rogan. They act like Joe Rogan's bringing on quacks and maniacs. Joe Rogan brings on everybody on his show. So unlike a real news show, Joe actually does the news. He brought on mainstream doctors. He brought on Dr. Sanjay Gupta on his show. He brought on that Dr. Hotez, I think he's taking over for Fauci.
Do you do the same thing?
So he brought those, fuck no. He brought those people on. And then he also brought on Dr. Malone, and then he also brought on Dr. Robert McCullough, who had a counter narrative. No, those are the people leading in their fields. Dr. Robert McCullough is one of the most cited cardiologists, and I heard that he was the most cited cardiologist and published in cardiology in the country. If he's not number one, he's number two. This is the guy they were trying to make you think was a quack. So when they came out with the coronavirus, the COVID-19, there was a group of doctors headed by people from Stanford and Yale and places like that who had a different idea on how to handle this pandemic. It was called the Great Barrington Declaration. And what they said was they should target the protection like we've done in all other pandemics towards people who are most vulnerable. Who would that be? That would be the elderly, people with comorbidities, and the obese. Instead, what they're doing is they're giving it to everybody and children. And now it's been proven that you get way more myocarditis in males under 40 than from that than you do from COVID. So we're hurting people, it's damaging people, it's killing people, and there's excess death that they won't even look into. I had the head of the Lancet study group. The head of the Lancet study group, Jeffrey Sachs, came on my show, and I asked him about they funded the research that started this virus, didn't they? And he said it certainly looks like it came from a U.S. biolab. And he said then, but what's interesting, Jimmy, is that nobody wants to look into where it actually came from. And he said, I wonder why that is. This is a guy from Columbia University. This is a guy who served to presidents after presidents. This is he's the head of the study group for the Lancet in the UK, one of the most respected medical journal. This is the guy on my show saying that. And so you asked me a question before about why don't I bring on people like Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Hotez on my show? They won't come on my show. I would love to bring them on and bring on Dr. Robert Malone and have them debate. I'm not going to debate a fucking doctor. But what I am going to do is I'm going to give people, I do an alternative news show. So my jumping off point is that the government and the corporate media are lying to you. I just have to find out where. Right. And so I knew they were lying about the COVID narrative, and it turned out they were lying everywhere. So I didn't want to. And so the people have said that to me. Why don't you bring on more mainstream doctors? Hey, why don't I bring on some guys from Raytheon and General Dynamics to talk about fucking war? Because they're propagandists. Because I don't give my people fucking propaganda. I debunk propaganda. That's why I also didn't bring on Russiagators on my fucking show. I brought on people who debunked Russiagate because you can get that everywhere else. It's the same fucking garbage people tell me, hey, why don't you spend more time criticizing Trump and the Republicans? Because where else are you gonna fucking get that? Because the Republicans and Trump never promised me a fucking thing. The Democrats did, and then they stabbed me in the front, and nobody's making them pay a price, which is what's keeping this fucking corrupt government, which is 100% corrupt, going, which is why they can send $100 billion to the most corrupt country in Europe for a fucking fossil fuel war, while they won't send it to the United States. Imagine if they sent $100 billion to Los Angeles, San Diego, Miami, Atlanta, Boston, New York, San Francisco, Minneapolis, to clean up the fucking homeless problems and give people affordable housing. But that corruption doesn't work that way. And our fucking government only works if you have the lubrication of corruption. That's the only way it can work, which is why you can get lockdowns and $100 billion into the pockets of the biggest fucking criminals of the century, while you can't even give people health care, a living wage, and they had to screw them out of their $2,000 check. You know, the rest of the fucking Western world, when they locked down people during COVID, they made sure they got their paycheck. You didn't hear that on the corporate news in America. That's That's right. They paid their salaries in Japan, in the UK, in Germany, in Canada. They gave them a fucking check. They didn't even give them one $2,000 check in America. And nobody, Bernie Sanders, AOC, nobody says, get in the fucking street and shut this shit down. You know what they're doing right now in France? They're trying to raise the retirement age from 62 to 65. And they had 8 fucking labor unions shut the entire fucking country down. And you're never going to see that on the news in America because America is the most propagandized country in the fucking world, and they have no idea. They have no idea what's going on in Ukraine, and they have no idea that they have no idea what's going on in Ukraine. And my shitlib fucking ex-friends in Hollywood are reading White Fragility as if it's not a fucking comedy book, and they're living their life as if culture wars fucking matter. You know, if it was 1860, the Democrats wouldn't be fixing slavery. They'd be bragging about their first transgendered slave owner.
Raise your eyebrows so we can go out.
Be like, hey, but you didn't fix the problem.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I love you, Jimmy. I love those rant. I love when you get going and you're ranting, and then like, you know, your special isn't that. Your special is a mix of that with a little more jokey and eyebrow raising. You know what I mean? So I'm over here laughing like ass off as you're losing your mind. You know.
I try my special. You know, when I go out and do comedy, I actually try to do comedy.
Yeah.
It's so funny, you know. People used to say before my show, before I started selling my own tickets, people would say, "Oh, I bet you can't play the South." I go, "Yeah, I play the South all the time.
Yeah, I
play everywhere: Florida, Texas, Oklahoma. I play everywhere. You know why? Because when I show up, I tell jokes.
Yes,
right.
I'm not fucking giving a lecture about politics. I'm actually making people laugh.
I get that. Like I've had that over the years too, like for television shows and stuff like that. And they're like, "Well, this stuff is funny, but it's not for middle America." And I'm like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, that's all I've done is work the road. And I figured out how to do these, and you have too, right? You figure out how to do these big issues to people that don't agree with you and people that do. And you figure out a way to temper it in a way that makes it so we do get that across to middle America. That's why we've made a living at this for fucking 30 years. And they're just wrong, right? They just don't want.
And also
that
the idea of middle
you know?
America has dissolved as well.
Yeah,
we're communicating on a very large scale. So
yeah, I've gotten for years like, you can't do what you do in the South. That's where I live.
Yeah,
yeah. That's there. People there think too. You know.
Yes.
You can make people laugh with ideas all over the country and there's a few places, you know, but you know, but mostly I found even when I would attract an all liberal crowd, then it got harder again for me because it's like, wait a minute, I'm allowed to talk about race. I've been making fun of the opposite point of view, and now you're like, oh, you can't say that. Like liberals are just as non-open-minded in my mind. So,
no, they became right-wingers. They're not liberals anymore. I thought liberals were for free speech, and free speech is an absolute. And if you say that now, they call you a right-winger, and they say you're fascist because I'm for free speech. It's the complete backward. Up is down, black is white. And here's what's happened, right? It's just like how corporations have co-opted gay rights and Black Lives Matter and shit like that. Like Nike, like they don't give a fuck about Black lives. They like Colin Kaepernick because they can sell more fucking shit if they put his face on stuff. They're still gonna have their shoes made by fucking slaves in prison, so they don't give a fuck. But anyway, now I fucking lost my train of thought. What was I saying? So they've co-opted. They say now if you're for freedom of speech, they say you're for fascism because the freedom of speech means people are going to use hate speech against minorities. And so if you're for free speech, you're for hate speech against minorities. No, I'm for free speech. Right. That includes any kind of hate that you want to call. I'm for free speech. I'm not for that. The way to counter that is more free speech because the establishment really wants to use that as a guise to clamp down on the people who are speaking against the establishment.
Well, just you really sound like what you're doing, like listening to you just in this hour that I've talked to you, right? You're yelling fire in a movie theater, man. You know what I mean? You're yelling like, hey guys, pay attention. This is, you know, and they have to shut you up. Because if everybody
because there's an actual fire?
Yeah, because there's an actual fucking fire, you know?
And so that's what the Twitter files are revealing, is that, we went from, I remember when I was at the Young Turks and they were all for banning Alex Jones from social media platforms. And I had to make the argument that, if you have any sense of history, which they don't, that's why they call themselves the Young Turks. Right. If they had, they would know that if this is just the ruse, this is the first shot across the bow to see what happens. And then if everybody goes along with this, they're going to use it against everybody. And you are supposed to be an anti-establishment news organization. Don't you think you're going to say something that's going to piss off people in power, and they're going to do the same thing to you? And they didn't think they were. And they, you know what? They were right. They never go against. They never say anything against. They just repeat the CIA talking points on everything. I was the one who went against it. But now we went from banning Alex Jones to banning the leading scientists and doctors in their field, to banning former presidents, to banning anybody who the establishment doesn't like, and they're doing it at the behest of the FBI. And who are they taking their orders from? It certainly isn't the fucking president, right? They give the orders to the president, just as Chuck Schumer proved. You don't want to go against the CIA or the FBI, because if you fuck with them, they have 6 ways of Sunday to get back to you. So there's the head of the Democrats in the Senate admitting that Trump was right when he said the deep state is fucking with him and that they're going to fuck with him. And they're the ones who actually run shit. The deep state, the permanent state, if you will, they're the ones who pick the wars. And who do they work for? They work for a handful of oligarchs that run our fossil fuel companies and our military industrial complex. And that's what explains our foreign policy for the last 100 years.
Yes. Yeah. I don't disagree with any of that, man. I don't know how you fix that, except I love listening to you talk about it, though. I can tell you that.
What's supposed to happen is somebody like Bernie Sanders and AOC with 13 million followers are supposed to tell their followers to get into the streets and shut shit down.
Yeah, but they're telling you to shut up. AOC is telling Jimmy Dore to shut up.
And so is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, when people were protesting his votes for war in Ukraine, he stopped what he was saying and said, "Who's paying you?" So he's now smearing peace activists. That's how much of a fucking war pig sellout and tool of the man Bernie Sanders is willing to be.
Who in this thing gives you hope? Does the new Democratic leader in the House give you hope when you hear him talk? Who gives you hope?
So okay, I just have to let everybody know how you become the leader of the Democratic Party in the House, or you become the leader of the Republican Party. Here's how you become leader. They're not leaders. I wouldn't ask directions to the freeway from fucking Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell. The way they become leaders is corporations know who the biggest mark is in politics. They give them the most fucking money, and they take that money that they get from Wall Street and health insurance, fossil fuel companies, the military industrial complex, and big tech, and then they take that money and they distribute it to their colleagues so that they can go win their races. And then they have to owe them a favor, so they vote for them as leader. And that's how we get our leaders, not because they're actual leaders, but because they're the biggest corruptible pieces of shit in the entire fucking politics. That's how they become leaders. You think Joe Biden became president because he was actually a fucking leader? He was a leader because he was chosen by Wall Street and the military industrial complex. You know what their first choice was? Kamala Harris. They took her, they anointed her the leader on Martha's Vineyard, and they pledged all their money to them, and then she couldn't get a vote, so they had to go plan B. We get Barack Obama, everybody else on the line. We promised Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary. Everybody falls down. They all get behind. Nobody wanted fucking Joe Biden. And so he's our president because he's chosen. Our presidents are fucking chosen. Barack Obama would not be allowed to be president if he was actually a radical. Of course, you know that. They'd be writing smear pieces about him, and they'd be gerrymandering him, his district, out of existence like they did to Dennis Kucinich. So the people who give me hope, someone like Shama Sawant, who was actually a socialist, who got $15 minimum wage in Seattle. And guess who she had to fight to get the $15 minimum wage in Seattle? She had to fight the Democratic City Council and the Democratic mayor. That's who's standing in your way. It's not Republicans, it's Democrats. I live in California, which has a supermajority Democrat legislature and a Democratic governor. We don't have fucking health care like they promised. They all ran on health care. We don't have it. There's people living under every fucking bridge. There's people going bankrupt everywhere you see in this fucking state, and we totally democratically. So if you think voting for one corporate puppet is better than voting for another, you're a sucker, and you've been taken by cultural issues. Exactly what I said before. All right, I got it.
Okay, thanks. Only one person gives you hope. That's not very hopeful, Jimmy. You're our hope. It's you. So get
Christian
to it.
Small. Christian Smalls gives me hope. Who is he? He's the guy who started the Amazon labor union on Staten Island. He unionized the first Amazon warehouse facility center. And how did he do it? He did it on Staten Island. What kind of people live on Staten Island? A fucking bunch of Trump voters. He organized them against the man. So when people say you got to organize along class lines, they don't realize what that means. That means you organize with fucking Trump voters. That's who you're supposed to organize with. They can't just organize with lefties. You can't just organize with fucking anyway. So
Right.
that's the biggest threat to the establishment is what happens at one of my live shows. People from the left, people from the right, old, young, black, white, every color in between, coming together because we realize our neighbor isn't our enemy. Our neighbor didn't do a controlled demolition of this economy, which created 400 new billionaires while it fucking crushed everybody else. That's not your neighbor's fault. They want me to blame my neighbor because he wouldn't take a vaccine that never worked the way they fucking said it did in the first place. Well, I'm not going to blame my fucking neighbor because he's hurting just like I am. I'm going to love my neighbor and I'm going to join with him in our fight against the fucking pigs who are running this goddamn country. And if that happens, when people catch on to that idea, it's not Republican against Democrat, because it fucking isn't. Go look at Christian Smalls at this Amazon warehouse on Staten Island. It's us against fucking them. And they want to keep us fighting over bathrooms and gender identity and all kinds of fucking bullshit because the class war has been won by them. And if we wake up, we have real power. We can get in the streets, which is why they won't show you what's happening in fucking France right now, because all the power comes from us. And we can take it just like that, and they know it. But we got fucking pieces of shit representatives like Bernie Sanders and AOC who pretend to represent the left, which actually take the left revolutionary energy and they funnel it back into that pro-war anti-worker party while they fucking tweet how much they care about you. They'll never fucking use their Twitter followers to go do an action. They'll never say go do a protest. Don't go shut. They'll never fucking go against the establishment because they are the establishment. They carry water for them, and that's my message, and that's why I'm hated by the Democrats and the Hollywood liberals.
Okay, dude, if you ever get really popular, that's going to get you killed. So it's been nice to have you on before that happens.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
It's like getting your jersey retired.
Yeah, I do. Dude, I love you, dude. Like when people used to say I'm a political comic to me, you're the kind of comic that I would look at and be like, no, that's a political comic. And you're also, it's like, you know what? Jimmy's got this covered. I'm going to do some jokes about my little boy playing baseball. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be as informed as you. I'm just not. I get informed by people like you. And
Tom, tell the rest of that story about you doing that joke about hitting kids.
Oh,
and
yeah. So I had this joke about something about timeouts and blah, blah, blah. Knock the fuck out, you know what I mean? And then he sort of pointed out to me, you're a nonviolence guy and blah, blah, blah. You don't believe that. You shouldn't be doing that. And then I ended up writing a different version of that and making fun of that and making fun of comics that are like, you need to beat your kids, meet your motherfucking kid. And I'd be like, well, I think they're right. I think they look at any prison system in the world and you'll find that it's filled with people who just weren't beaten enough as children. Like, what you in for, Hacksaw Hank? My parents with their patience and their love and their understanding. And so I would point that out. We have a system where we don't hit women. We all agree you should never lay your hands on a girl for any reason, right? Unless it's your daughter, then swing away with whatever belt or wooden spoon you got. And so over time, I developed that too. And Jimmy also has great material on that same subject. Like, how many punches would it take to make you a good mother? You know what I mean? Or something. He has that joke. And so many years later, another comic got in touch with me on Facebook and said, not necessarily just because of that, but he said it was an influence on me and my wife. We're having kids, and we've decided we're not going to use corporal punishment or hit our kids. And your joke was a part of why, because how that makes sense stuck with me. And so I made a point of getting in touch with Jimmy because it's like grandfathered up because of that, because of Jimmy telling me that. That material then went to this, which now these kids aren't getting abused or hit at all. And
that's a real difference.
It's one of those few times in comedy where you're like, that thing you want to happen. I put that seed in there that turned into this thing that's a power for good. And so I wanted Jimmy to know that, and I could tell, he was like, he was appreciative to know that, and I wanted him to know that I'm appreciative that you did that for me, which ended up, I got to feel that feeling like from somebody. So I really appreciate that.
I like the way you put it. The way you put it was very poignant. You said, so no matter what happens with your comedy, at least there's one kid who's not going to get hit because of it. And it was like, wow, it almost made me tear up thinking about it. Right? There's going to be one kid who's not going to get hit, and I'm like, that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a legit, honest to God, measurable difference.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to come on here and basically do your show. I didn't even get to talk to you about like how much preparation you do for your show and how much work it takes, and or if you just are naturally, you just love doing all this reading and research, and then it's just like you turn the mic on and get to fucking say what you think, or or are you practicing these things in the mirror, or
No, it's just I talk about them all day, so it just kind of comes out of me now. But it takes an unbelievable amount of prep for the show. I have a lot of help. Malcolm Flesher's my main producer. Misha, Steph. Help me out with it. So get up at 8 in the morning and working on it until we go to 3 o'clock. We go to air and then do a 2 or 3 hour show, and then I start doing all the post production. I got to do the titles, got to do the tags, come up with the thumbnails. It's a lot of work. So it's a constant. They're at least 10-hour days, sometimes 12. So
I don't know. I'm proud of you, man. I'm proud of the guy I know as a comic driving around telling people how they should do it. Now you're. You've built this on your own. You know what I mean? It's really cool, and it's good to see you're getting the fans and getting the views and the people that you should. So
I appreciate it. I really do.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, and hopefully I come to do some comedy in your town.
Yeah, man. It's a bigger size market than you realize.
Okay.
So look it up. You know what I mean? It's in the top probably 100 markets or whatever that is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So.
All right, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it,
Yeah,
and
man. Good to
good
see
luck
you.
with your show. I hope
Thanks,
to see you. Hope to see you soon.